Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Once a DJ. If you'd like to support the show, then head to onceadj.com/support to find out how you can help. If you'd like to get in touch with any feedback or suggestions, email onceadjpodcast@gmail.com. Once a DJ is produced by the good people at Remote Control. If you'd like to find out more about working with them, head to remote-ctrl.co.uk. Time for the show. Omar Acosta, thanks a lot for coming on Once a DJ. You're the first person we've had on the podcast that isn't a DJ, but what you've done is you've told a really important story about DJing, mixtape DJing in particular, and the culture of that, the genesis, and what it's brought for artist development, and also the business end of it. It's really fascinating watch. And so just for our listeners, just to confirm, then you were a writer, producer, and director on this, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's a lot of work.
That was a lot of work, yeah.
So what brought you to this point? From my reading about it, you kind of started off as an art director, is that correct?
Yeah, I started off as a designer. Back in the day, I was with MTV, back when MTV played videos still. And I was one of the art directors. And so from there, I sort of like got into, through MTV, I sort of got into like directing their commercials and, some music videos and that sort of thing. And that's sort of where I cut my teeth, if you will, in film.
So just to wind back then, was art and design always a passion of yours?
Oh yeah, hard. Yeah, it still is. I love design. To me, it's like problem solving, man. It's like a game of chess, like it's like just something as simple as like designing a logo or something like that. To me, is still fascinating. Just coming up with that solution,
So can you expand on that a little bit about the problem solving aspect of it? Because that's not a way I'd ever really thought about design of kind of a single block. Like I would understand it in terms of, say, a flyer and the hierarchy of your information and things, but can you explain that in terms of like a logo?
Yeah, I mean, you got certain, different elements. I mean, you got a bunch of elements in design. You could flip it into a flyer, right? But then now you're dealing with, like you said, layout and information architecture and that sort of thing. But when you get into like something like, I mean, there are other elements that make me feel this way as well. But when you get into elements like making a logo, you have to communicate so much with one mark, right? With one sort of like icon, and most of the time, the viewer really only has, I think it's roughly like 7 seconds, if I remember correctly from school. You have about 7 seconds to really register that, right? So it's like, how do you get an entire the DNA of a brand? How does that come across in one mark in a span of like 7 seconds? So there's a lot of problem solving and going back and forth with sketching and that sort of thing. So when I was a kid in New York, it takes me back to like R&Ding with graffiti. Right. It's like, okay, so now I got this letter, and then how does this letter go to this next letter, and that sort of thing. And I would test myself with that when I'm talking about like 8 years old or something. But I would test myself with that. And so I would look at the end of the day, so if I was doing like a graffiti when I was a little kid, I was doing like a piece, just like on a black book. Like I would test myself, like my failure was determined by the amount of eraser marks on the on that piece. You know what I'm saying? So the least amount of eraser marks, that was sort of like a little game I would play with myself. It's like, all right, cool. So I managed to figure this problem out, in a certain amount of time, with the least mistakes possible, right? So it's kind of the same thing. It's a sort of like thread that's gone on through my life, I guess, is design.
Yeah. So was graffiti your first kind of route or connection with hip hop then?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that was, I was a little kid on 110th Street, and I think even before I got hard into the music, I was more into the art. Back then, if you wanted to listen to hip hop, it was like a radio station, and you had to like find, where it was playing, and I just remember like bumping into it sometimes at night. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's, like sometimes I'll be like, and I'll be, wait, is that hip hop? And getting really excited, and so now, but graffiti, just like drawing. I mean, I didn't even call it graffiti; just like drawing. To me, was something that was just like right there and that was accessible. And then it became a thing where you go to school and you'd have like your friends. I went to the school PS75 off on 96th Street off 110th Street in New York, and so you battle. You go to school and you show your piece, and the next you show your piece to somebody or a couple of people, and then in the cafeteria, and like the next day somebody else would come up with their piece, like, oh shit, this fucking guy, and so you go, it's like, all right, back to the lab, so you go back home that night and you'd be working and working and working, and then you start incorporating like Marvel heroes and that sort of thing. So yeah, but then hip hop started slowly like taking over, because we had there were like if you picture like a big cafeteria, right, in school, and then you had like these long tables, and like in each table it was like a crew. It was like, okay, here's the graffiti crew, what I'm saying, like, and then you see like people rhyming in another crew, and then you see another, just like people hanging out at one table, but and then you see, so you saw what came to be known as the ciphers, right? So you saw like kids like rhyming and that sort of thing. So it was like people started gravitating towards what they, I guess, what their craft was, right? And so to me it was that it was definitely the graffiti element of hip hop.
So when you kind of pursued art as a study, was your kind of passion and craft of graffiti enough to get you through, or did you have to learn a load of different styles of art to kind of fill in the gaps? Like, could you just survive on graffiti?
No. I was like, so what happened with me was a little different, because I was like sort of like suspended in animation, because what happened was, I was living in New York, and my family was, Puerto Rican family living in New York, and then we abruptly moved back to Puerto Rico.
How old would you have been?
I was maybe like 11 or something. Like I was, right. I forget exactly, but it was like I was deep enough where, I had my little friends, like my little skateboard crew, we were listening to like punk and the Clash and hip hop and. You know what I'm saying? And it was like all those sounds that were sort of like permeating from like every corner of New York City that became, really like this one culture. Like I was knee deep in that stuff, and so then it's like abruptly I go back to Puerto Rico and it's like zero, nothing, and so I continue to draw, but I think around that time, actually definitely around that time, I got more into fine arts, and I did that in Puerto Rico. So I got more into like still life and the charcoal and just like really the fine art aspect of things. Even though I would like do graffiti as a hobby, like I definitely started exploring those other mediums.
Yeah. So were you able to? When did you move back to the US then?
I moved back when I was like, I want to say when I was like 16.
Right. So it was quite a while between. So.
Yeah. And it was also that time where it's like, it's a pretty like influential, time in your upbringing, right? As you're coming up. Right. So.
Was hip hop big in Puerto Rico then?
Yeah. So. It wasn't, right? It wasn't, right? And there was a lot of prejudice also if you were into hip hop. You had, around that time, I want to say, so the thing with me is once I got the hip hop bug, and now we recognize it as the hip hop, you know what I'm saying? Back then it was just like a culture thing, right? But, once I got that, like, it was like something that I was like looking for. And so I, if you're looking for something, you're going to find it. And I sort of like in Puerto Rico, it was like a subculture of a subculture, right? But so you had like Spanish rap, and so you were looking for that, around that time you had like that Vico C, who was the first Spanish rapper, on record, right? Coming out with like these underground mixtapes, and what made that crazy is that like back then, like cursing was a big deal. Like you did, like if somebody cursed on the tape, you'd hide that from your parents, you'd be, that was there, I don't care how bad you were hiding that from your parents, so it was a whole different, it was like a whole different, it was just a whole different animal, back then. So what made that tape crazy, that Vico, shout out to Vico C, that Vico tape crazy, was that the rumor was that he was like cursing, it was like, oh, it's like curses, and it was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? He's cursing on the tape, and so you had to get your hands on that, right? And I think that to me was really the first sort of like understanding of the power of the mixtape, right? Because here I was like trying to get my hands on this mixtape, and the only people that had them were like the somebodies,
Yeah.
Like you had to like really know somebody or be that person that like you just dropped in your lap, and they were stingy with it, they understood they understood the power of that tape. They understood that like, wait, no, this is valuable because I'm the only one that has it. Once this thing starts getting out, it loses its value, right? So you had things, you had like the Spanish rap movement in Puerto Rico when I was a little kid, when I first got there, and I was definitely involved with that. And then in school, like we had in Puerto Rico in school, we had like you start gravitating towards like-minded people, and there were a few kids that like were into hip hop as well, because of the connection between Puerto Rico and New York. There were a lot of people with family in New York and that sort of thing, so I identified with those guys, and so we started like a little dance crew, where we go to like after class we go to like somebody's like Marquesina in Puerto Rico, which is Marquesina's like it's like a garage, but it's not as fancy. It's like it's basically like it's like a roof to put your car under, But in Puerto Rico, they're a big deal because that's where people have their parties and that sort of thing. So we go after school, and then we just like have like just come up with routines, like little dance routines and that sort of thing. And then we started like seeing like Big Daddy Kane and like Eric B. and Rakim, and those guys, and then we try to emulate those dance routines, and those Marquesinas, and then we go like Saturday nights, Friday nights, Saturday nights, it was like three of us, and we'd like just like walk around, the barrios and that sort of thing, and see who else was having parties, because there was always, like I said, like the Marquesinas, that's where you had the parties, and so there was always parties in those in those spaces during the weekends in particular. So we'd like walk around and see and try to crash those parties, and then we do our little routines, and people didn't realize that we practice this, and they'd be like, oh shit, so yeah, man. So it started, it was hip hop was something that was a lot harder to find, in Puerto Rico, but I certainly did everything possible to get my hands on whatever I could.
Can I just ask how old you are?
No, I'm 46, man. I just turned 46.
Right, okay, because I'm just thinking about timelines and
no, it's all good
and things like that. Yeah. So what year did you move back to USA?
That USA, that was so New York. I want to say that was like 95, maybe.
So if you left, so you would have left in about 88, 89.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I remember being late 80s in Puerto Rico for sure.
Yeah. So I know in some countries kind of the culture and the trends can kind of like be a bit slower. So was it quite a culture shock coming back from Puerto Rico to New York at that time when so much has gone on? You know, I guess when you left, it was all about the fast rap. And then when you're coming back, it's a lot more, there's all the sort of boom bap and the jazz rap and things like that. And I guess the culture must have changed a lot in that time. Were you ready for it? Was it a shock?
No. I was going to New York. I have family in New York, and I was going to New York here and there throughout that time. And around that time before I went back to New York, I was already in the mixtape game.
Right.
So I already knew in Puerto Rico, like there were DJs, like there was DJ Playero, shout out to DJ Playero, who has his own amazing stories. He was instrumental in the creation of reggaeton. And so I would stop like Playero. He had this little red car, and I would stop him randomly, and I'd just be like, yo, you got a tape. And he just I remember sometimes he just pull whatever he was playing in his car, his tape deck, and just, for $5. So and then one of the first mixtape DJs from New York to start selling things in Puerto Rico was Tony Touch. So Tone would, so there was a little record store. I mean, tiny, and when I say tiny, I mean picture like maybe like 2 closets. And that was in Old San Juan, and I was going to school in Old San Juan. And so I would just walk there to this little record store, and then you started seeing, I think it was like Tony Touch Volume 1 was like the first one I got. It was, or something like that. I remember being like single digit for sure. And so I started grabbing those, and by then it was getting to boom bap.
Yeah. So
I was already being introduced to that then, and then I started understanding that there was more. Then they started getting real creative with it. Like they started doing the blends, and the blends were making sense. It was like, oh wow, this is on beat. This makes sense for the context of this song. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, I could get real geeky. I could get real geeky with it, but I'm saying, like, it started feeling. You know what I'm saying? It started feeling like it was like you could bump this in your car.
Yeah.
And sort of and similar to like the Vico stuff, like it was like a status symbol. Like you wanted to drive around. Back then you would drive around Old San Juan. You just literally just drive around in circles. Because all the clubs were there. So you drive around and you just want to be seen, and you want to be seen playing that mixtape, so I would do that sometimes. And so to answer your question, by the time I went back to New York, I was already, and like, I was up on what was going down. I like to think, right?
Yeah. So did you go back to New York and then were you like, right, I want to work in this, I want to be part of this movement? Did you want to kind of attach yourself to it, or?
No. I mean, I was a fan of the culture, but I went back to New York and I just focused on my studies, man. I knew I wanted to do art and that sort of thing, and my whole thing was, okay, how do I work my way into art school, basically? And so that was my focus, man. And I did that with the thought of like, getting into advertising or design studio or that sort of thing. Because again, that was my first love. So I was fine with that. I mean, I was more than fine with that at the time. I hate to be one of those guys, but like, it's funny to me, like when I'm on, social media or whatever, and I see so-and-so creative director, it's like, at the time I would have like that was my thing. I was like, okay, I want to be, I want to be a creative director, and that was a big deal to have that title. That was a big deal to have that title. And it's not something that you threw around either. Like I wouldn't have had the balls to call myself a creative director, if I wasn't one, it was that sort of thing. So I would, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to land at like a design studio like Pentagram or something like that, and then MTV like at the time was like top of the food chain, like people were looking to them for, there was no internet like that, so it's like, you look to other avenues to get your inspiration, and so I was looking to things like that. So, and that's where I landed. I just ended up at MTV.
So was that late 90s then?
Yeah, roughly. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because that's when there would have been MTV2 and over here there was a few different MTV channels.
Right, exactly. Yeah, right.
Were you across kind of anything and everything there, or were you very
musically?
Would they have people for genres? Yeah.
No, I mean, it's funny because there were certain times where like, I remember I had to do a project for like one of the pop artists. It was like a female pop artist. And I was like, fuck. Like I remember telling my creative director at the time. I remember being like, yo, like, come on, I'll even listen to this. And he was like, well, that's your job to listen to, to listen to it. So, to answer your question, yeah, we had to listen to everything, but by that time I was pretty much an encyclopedia of, hip hop, and I was hard into, salsa, like Fania, that sort of thing from that time. So and even the Fania stuff was mixtapes, by the way. I would get Fania mixtapes from my barber, I remember just playing a final tape and like rewinding just for the horn section. I'd be like, yo, how those horns, man.
Is this like the old Fania stuff?
Yeah, the old Fania stuff. Absolutely. The new, like the 80s Fania stuff was garbage. But like that 70s stuff. Yeah. I love that stuff, man. But it was the same template, you found something, you found like a break in it, and you rewound, you hit rewind, and you were like, I want to listen to this again and again and again, and I, like I said, I would experience that. I remember vividly, like just like sitting in the couch, like with the radio next to me, just rewinding the horn section on a Fania mixtape, just rewinding that and being like, God damn, like that horn, man, like, or like there was this artist, Papaluca, who was a pianist of the Sonora Ponceña group in Puerto Rico. I don't know if they were Fania, though. I want to say they were Fania because Fania had everything. But I remember he'd do these piano solos, and I just would rewind those piano solos, man. So I was kind of into that stuff, which was weird at the time for a young kid, because like it wasn't stuff like people that age were listening to.
Does that cross over with like this Chicano soul stuff then?
I love that stuff, man. I love that. I can't speak to that culture. But I love that culture, man. I love that stuff, man. I love everything they got going on there, and I love how they're true to that, man. They like those oldies. They like that soul stuff. I love soul stuff too, man.
Yeah, there's a guy, I'll send you a link to a guy on Mixcloud who does some really good mixes of that sort of stuff.
Word. I love that stuff, man. And I love how they pair with the lowriders, and you know what I'm saying? Like it's like they got a whole thing that's magical in its own way, man.
Yeah, definitely. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying One to DJ. I wanted to create a product for the listeners to be able to support the show, and for the guests as a token of gratitude for being on. So I've teamed up with Sure Shot Shop to create some One to DJ 45 RPM adapter clamps. These are my weapon of choice as a 45 adapter, as they add stability and grip to aid you in any setup. These are available for £25 each plus flat fee postage from onetodj.bigcartel.com. And if you'd like to see the other models you can buy and also customise, check out sureshotshop.com. If you're an avid collector of timeless music on vinyl but don't have the budget to fork out for those pricey originals, then look no further than Be With Records. From library music to yacht rock, jazz, hip-hop, disco and beyond, Be With lovingly reissue some of the coolest classics. All of their records are carefully remastered and cut to the highest standards to make sure the pressings are of peak audio quality and do justice to the music being released. And something else to note is that they don't do limited runs to drive up resale and hype. If the demand is there, they'll repress, as the focus is the music, not the profit margin. They have flat rate shipping and free UK shipping on orders over £60. And if you head to bewithrecords.com and use the discount code onceadj, all one word, you'll get 10% off your order. So head to bewithrecords.com and level up those crates today. So do you think that how long were you at MTV then?
Not that, well, maybe like 5 years or something like that, I want to say.
So do you think having to kind of learn and listen to very different types of music that you wouldn't be into, do you think that sharpened your skills as a designer?
I think so, absolutely. Yeah, because it forces you to think outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
So yeah, because I could do. Listen, I was one of the first ones to do a graffiti show, not show, but a design. We did this show for Christina Aguilera, and it was called Stripped in NYC. I think, if I remember correctly. But the whole gag with that was that the brief they gave me was that she wanted to get out of this poppy persona brand that she had at the time and sort of go into something more edgy. And at the time, it was very hard to push anything graffiti, because it had a stigma and whatever. And so that was the first. I could probably find that and send it your way. But that was one of the first graffiti show packages that MTV aired, and they were like, oh, it's not legible, and I was like, hey, I'll make it legible. Trust me, I got this. So I had to create a style that was legible, all that stuff. So we ended up doing this thing where we were just tagging on, through design, not practically, right? But a collage of buildings of New York City and that sort of thing. And then that's ultimately where she had the concert. So, so I say that to say that was very easy to me because that was the first thing that came to my mind. Right.
Yeah, because she, around that Dirty era.
Dirty, right. Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of when she kind of lent more into like a Hispanic style, I guess, or a Hispanic influence.
Yeah, she I don't know what her intention was, but or motive, but I guess she just wanted to sort of like get out of that and but yeah, it was around that time.
Yeah, amazing. So what brought the end of MTV then? Was it you just wanting to go freelance and do certain things, or was it? Because I know you've done certain kind of brands and you've done like a load of stuff for NFL, for example, as well.
Yeah. I guess it just felt like it ran its course. Like the universe was just like, all right, man, like I think you're done here, dude. And MTV felt like they were leaning more towards My Sweet 16 and that sort of thing, and these shows that they had, right, for instance, and it wasn't, I wasn't mad at any of that. I wasn't mad at any of that. I was, I say that to say that's not the reason why I left, but ultimately I was made an offer that I took in Los Angeles, so I left because of that.
Yeah, it was a strange time. So that's kind of mid 2000s, isn't it? And it's like reality TV was huge.
Right. It was a strange time. It was a strange time for everything. I think it was a strange time for music.
Yeah.
It was a strange time for fashion. It was like things were trying to figure themselves out around that time.
Yeah, because I think for DJing, there's a few things that happened around that around the mid 2000s. Downloading came in.
Yeah.
Record sales were going down. The advent of Serato and other digital DJing systems. The blog era. It was this weird time in certainly in hip hop and in DJing. It was a really funny one.
Yeah. I think we all felt it.
Yeah, because for me, I've kind of realised that was kind of when I started DJing. I started DJing more, and I think I just maybe got into it at the wrong time.
Interesting.
To really pursue it more. Yeah, it's something I'm thinking about quite a bit, because I've kind of gone away from it and come back to it in quite a different way. But you know, like when I was doing it, then record shops were all closing. It was harder to get records.
Right.
The things that you'd get at, say, yard sale type of things would be absolutely terrible, whereas now you can go in England, we'll have like car boot sales, and you'll have decent record sellers there. There's usually a half decent record shop in every town that you turn up in. It's a lot better a time to be a DJ now, I think.
Interesting.
You know, you can connect to Tidal if you want to do the digital thing, and people are a bit more receptive as well now to different styles of music and stuff, which as a DJ is a blessing and a curse.
I think you're right about that, because I remember people sort of like bucking technology around that time also. You know, there was a lot of hating, a lot of like, no, you know, you can't do this, you can't do that. But that was in all sort of like aspects of art, I think. Because around that time, like technology took a little bit of a leap in a lot of aspects, I think. And I remember just people going, no, that's, you know, you gotta stay true to this and you gotta stay true to that. And so there was like a bucking going on around that time.
Yeah, and you can get that when there's big changes that come in, people can be resistant to them and not think that things can coexist. It's like, you know, you get it in hip hop when a new era comes in. You'd get people that were into the golden era, and then Shiny Suit comes in, and people are just questioning why it's necessary and thinking that everyone should just still be listening to Eric B and Rakim and nothing else.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of things with change. I mean, you look at AI at the moment.
Right.
I think AI, as much as anything, gives people a fear that they're going to be redundant.
Yeah.
Rather than kind of, we can look at how we can use it to make certain processes quicker, and to help us to have more time to do the bits that are unique to us.
I think you're right about that, man. You know, I went to art school, and I think I learned that lesson pretty fast of like really embrace technology. I mean, my major was literary design and technology. That was the name of it, and I think I learned that lesson pretty fast. I think there was some new stuff coming out at the time. I forget what it was, but I remember people being resistant towards it, and I remember one of the professors, he was just like, well, you know, let's talk about technology then. Let's talk about the new technologies that revolutionize things, right? So, people started mentioning your usual suspects, the loom, that sort of thing. And then I forget what philosopher it was, but I remember it was either like Plato or Socrates, or maybe it was neither, right? But I remember he was like, well, what about Plato? Or, and I could be wrong, right? But I remember he was like, what about Plato, who refused to embrace the paper when it came out because he felt that it was going to ruin memory, because those guys were doing things right. So it's the same thing, right? So it's like every so often this technology comes in that like you mentioned AI, and I look at AI now and I'm excited about that. I'm like finally, like, anyway, whatever. I geek out on that stuff, like, but
yeah, like a friend of mine's been using one. I don't know if it's Midway or what, but he's been using one of them for mock-ups of set designs or something like that, or like product photography mock-ups or something like that, and just to get the idea across to people, to execute it in real life is a different thing.
It's a whole different thing, 100%. Yeah.
Because sometimes, when you work with clients, you can give them something rough and explain it to them, but unless it looks close to finished, they just don't get the concept sometimes.
Yeah.
So, this can afford them the opportunity to get that a lot more literally.
Yeah. I think they're ethical issues, and on my end, I think they're ethical issues. I think
Yeah.
if you're just going to let the AI do all the work, then that's what is that, right? But like you said, if I think if it's to create a mock-up, and then it's like you're adding your own flavor to it and it's influencing you, or it's to do a presentation, start a conversation, then it's extremely useful. Stuff like that used to take me a month.
Yeah.
Right. So if you got something like that helping you, and you're able to like really program it and let it know exactly what you want, then who's to say that's not yours?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting with when things are modelled based on other people's IP. That's when it definitely gets into grey areas.
That's a different story. That's a different story. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're blatantly going, Andy Warhol style, that's your prop, then come on now.
Yeah. So just getting back to your timeline then. So you ended up a little bit later on. You ended up working on the Stretch and Bobbito documentary, didn't you?
Yeah.
So how did you get from leaving MTV to there? What was that kind of route?
Well, I was doing a lot of commercials, and I was doing I was doing what we now refer to as content, right? Like I was doing like these little like pieces with people and artists and that sort of thing, and working with brands and doing design, or making films or whatever. But I just always wanted to do a full. I don't know. There's something in me that likes to tell stories, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think it really is as simple as that. And I just wanted to tell a full story. And so I got a bunch of stories that I've written down and whatever. And I took a course in LA when I lived in LA. I took a course. It was called Acting for Directors. And it was taught by this woman, incredible woman called Judith Weston. And I remember I have a friend who's a director. He directed a couple of features, and he was like, "Hey, I recommend this book. I read it. It helped me." And it was her book. And so I read it, and then she had a course in LA, and I took it. And so I was in that course, and I remember presenting one of my stories, and there was this writer also there, and who was great. And we all sort of like went to lunch afterwards, and I was like, telling her my story, my idea, whatever, and I remember she was like, "Well, tell me about you," and we started having this conversation, conversation you and I are having, and she was like, "Well, write about that," and so at that point, just a flurry of ideas like just started like coming out, because life experiences and the culture and all this, this, that, and next, and I just remember like listening to that radio show when I was a kid, and I remember playing, like hitting play and then falling asleep, like to record it. Sorry, hitting record and then falling asleep. Because around that time, even though hip hop was on the radio, you still were getting the stuff that Stretch and Bobbito were playing.
Yeah.
So and it was just, to me, it was that time, that moment in time is just a beautiful moment. I don't know how to explain it. Like one of the things I remember telling Stretch and Bob during the filming, during the production of Stretch and Bobbito was I want New York to be a character in this.
Yeah.
Because it's important that people understand what the real context was like with New York. Because it certainly is not what it is now. New York was, I remember just like traveling, and I couldn't wait to get back to New York. I remember being in Puerto Rico, and I couldn't wait to get back to New York. There was just so much energy and so much going on, and so I wanted that to come across. But in any case, it was one of those ideas that sort of like wake you up at like 4 a.m. You're like, I got to write this down. And I remember my head going, stretching Bobito, stretching Bobito, stretching Bobito. And it just rolled off the top of the tongue, you know, and my advertising sort of hat came in. And I was like, okay, that, you know, I could see people wanting to say that, you know, I could see people wanting to say stretching Bobito. And I could see people like being curious about the name, you know, so there's legs here. And once the advertising hat came in, I remember just going, all right, and I'm seeing the kids now wearing Tommy Hilfiger again, you know, and all this stuff. So there's a resurgence, you know, people are recycling this stuff. I think they're ready for something like this. Whereas I don't know that if we would have done that film during the programming at that show or around that time, I don't know that it would have been that successful. Yeah. But it just felt like the stars were aligned, man. And I just decided to make the phone call and I called Bob and he kind of played me at first. He was like, oh, whatever. No, I don't want to do it, you know? And I was like, all right, cool. Well, you change your mind, call me. And then the next day he called me. And so I think a week after that we were shooting.
Did you approach him cold?
For that, yeah, I did. Yeah, for that I did. Yeah, for that I was just like, and he had, he had just done the film and all that, and I understand, you know, what it's like to do a film. So, obviously, and so like I could see, like, you know, getting out of a film and being like, wait, what? No, man, I need a break.
Which film was it that he'd done?
He did Doing It in the Park. If I'm Doing It in the Park, yeah,
right,
and so, you know, it just took off from there, man. And you know, and we didn't know what we had. You know, I remember, you know, Bob and I will talk every morning. And I remember Bob and I just having these very candid conversations, just going, you know, there's a chance nobody's going to see this, you know, being cool with that, you know, being like, well, all right, let's just finish it up, man. You know?
So was this your first documentary?
It was, yeah. It was the first one.
Wow.
It was the first one that I produced and Bob directed. Yeah,
that's a pretty good first effort then.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Thank you. That was, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. It just really tells a story of an era, and particularly for someone that grew up in a small village in the north of England, to be able to kind of witness that story in retrospect is a really special thing to have, you know, because we have this luxury now where we can get a bit more connection and learning through the internet. Like, I've always kind of, when I've had off time at work, I've always like kind of looked up things in eras. It might be like old wrestling, or it might be old like jazz musicians, or what, like it's always the history of people and movements. And it's one of those things, like the Stretch and Bob show was a huge thing in relevance to New York rap and the freestyle, you know, like the Big L and Jay-Z freestyle, for example, Wu-Tang going down there, people like that. And so to get this kind of deep dive into it was really, really nice.
Dope, good, yeah. No, I'm that makes me happy, man. And I'm glad you said that you got New York at the time also, because that was kind of a big deal to us.
Yeah, definitely, and it hit really well. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying Once a DJ. I wanted to create a product for the listeners to be able to support the show, and for the guests as a token of gratitude for being on. So I've teamed up with Sure Shot Shop to create some Once a DJ 45 RPM adapter clamps. These are my weapon of choice as a 45 adapter, as they add stability and grip to aid you in any setup. These are available for £25 each plus flat fee postage from onceadj.bigcartel.com. And if you'd like to see the other models you can buy and also customise, check out sureshotshop.com. If you're an avid collector of timeless music on vinyl, but don't have the budget to fork out for those pricey originals, then look no further than Be With Records. From library music to yacht rock, jazz, hip-hop, disco and beyond, Be With lovingly reissue some of the coolest classics. All of their records are carefully remastered and cut to the highest standards to make sure the pressings are of peak audio quality and do justice to the music being released. And something else to note is that they don't do limited runs to drive up resale and hype. If the demand is there, they'll repress, as the focus is the music, not the profit margin. They have flat rate shipping and free UK shipping on orders over £60. And if you head to bewithrecords.com and use the discount code onceadj, all one word, you'll get 10% off your order. So head to bewithrecords.com and level up those crates today. So after that, how long was it after you'd done that? Because that must have been quite an exhausting process as well, making that sort of documentary. Was it? How long did it take you to make?
I think it took like a year to make that one. If I'm not mistaken, it took about a year or so to do that one.
So when that had come out, was there a bit of downtime in between, or were you like, right, where's the next project? I need to do more of this.
I always had Mixtape in the back of my head.
Yeah.
For sure, I always had that in the back of my head. But it's mostly because as a visual person, as a person that thinks visually, I just remember going, you know what would be dope is if it's a movie, but it's like cut like a mixtape, you know?
Yeah.
You know? And so I think that was the spark, just visually. I think that was like the spark. And so there was a little, I think it was like a year or two before I decided to pull the trigger on that one.
Did that start off with a conversation with Tony?
It did. Yeah, it did. That started off with a conversation with Tone, and
Tony Touch for our listeners, by the way.
Shout out to Tony Touch. And that started off with a conversation with Tone, and the reason for that is because I wanted to do something with somebody that I had a sort of like an emotional attachment to,
yeah.
and just to add to the authenticity of the piece. And you know, I mean, I've been listening to that dude since I was a kid, man. So you know, so there was just nobody else, man. But I'm glad he gave me, I'm happy that he gave me the opportunity to make this with him, and yeah, that started off with that phone call. And I didn't know what, I remember telling him, and it was a phone call with him and Doo-Wop, and I remember just being like, yo, I don't know what we have, what's here, but I know there's something here, in terms of the story.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful that Tone gave me sort of the opportunity to explore that a little bit with him. And so initially it was like, well, let's I forget what mixtape, but I was like, let's do something let's start off with something with one of the mixtapes. Let's start off with, because I didn't know the story.
It's a huge story.
It's a huge story, yeah. And so we started, right? So we just started, with the interview, and then it was like things started connecting, and it got to the point where even Tone was like, all right, man, let's just do the whole thing, the whole story,
Yeah.
And Tone's a producer in the film, and so, I mean, I was like, done, and so, but it just kept going and going and going, man. Like we'd interview one person, and then that person would give us two more names, and
yeah,
and it was like, all right, cool. Now we got to find this person. Now we got to find that person, and so once we got everybody that we needed, it was just a matter of like, how do we give this some flavor, and not turn it into like, some like after school documentary or something. How do we give this some real flavor?
Well, this is the thing. I thought there's a few thoughts I've had when watching it. One is the names that you've got on it: Mike Tyson, Dante Ross, ASAP Rocky, Shaquille O'Neal. You've got some pretty big people on there outside of just the kind of mixtape DJs, and outside of rap culture as well. There's a lot of people interviewed in this film, and I can't imagine how much stuff there is on the cutting room floor. It's like, how do you get such a different amount of information about something that you're telling a story of about 30 years, 40 years. How difficult is it to turn that into a kind of single narrative in the way that you did?
Oh, I mean, it's extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where the sort of like mixtape style editing came in, you know.
Right.
So it was, you know, when I was sitting with the editors, it was like, all right, let's try to have people finish each other's sentences, you know, and that way we give everybody a chance to speak. You know, and so that's kind of why it feels like it feels like that, you know, and it's got like, you know, weird stops and, you know, these sort of like, you know, interstitials and animations, and I wanted to add more. I wanted to add like weird commercials, you know. I wanted to add like wait, what, you know, what's that movie from? You know, I wanted to add like a lot more of that stuff to make it really feel like it's a mixtape, and I wanted it to feel like it could be something that you're watching, and you know, you could also like wash the dishes and you could hear it and it feels like you're still like there's music involved, you know. So and you know, nobody's there gratuitously either, you know. There's everybody's there for a reason, you know. I think it was important that we show that, you know, when you mentioned Mike Tyson, like I think it's important that we show that, like, you know, he was training to mixtapes, right? So that was the user, you know, ultimately, right? And I think it was important that we had that we have a perspective from both the DJ and the listener.
Yeah, and I think when Kid Capri's talking about how it was it Alpo and people like that were kind of heavy in the streets, were buying his tapes off him for crazy amounts of money, and the way that they kind of resonated in the streets, and the social equity that you kind of got from playing their tapes is absolutely fascinating.
It really is, man. And you know, there's a lot that I identified with. Also, obviously not to the extent of somebody like, you know, Kid Capri was a living legend. But you know, it goes back to that Vico tape in Puerto Rico. You know, it really was one of those things. You know, it really was this thing where if you had it, it was like, all right, you know, at least for us, you know, for us kids, you know, like if you had it, it was like, all right, this guy's important. This guy knows somebody. This guy knows somebody. You know, so it was one of those things, man.
Was there anyone on it that because when I'm doing this podcast, I just get really excited about certain interviews that I get. Like I obviously enjoyed them all, but there's certain ones where I'm like, I can't believe this person's up for doing this. Did you get any of that experience when you were doing the film?
I think I got that with everybody, man. I was grateful that everybody wanted to be a part of this and tell this story that really hasn't been told, you know, and you know, again, everybody that's there is there for a reason, you know. So I mean, I'm grateful to everybody that showed up to this film.
Yeah, and it's an amazing film, and I urge anyone who hasn't seen it yet to make the effort to go and see it. If there's a screening local to you, I know we've got a screening coming up in London very soon. I'll get the details of that and I'll be sharing that on social media. And if you'd like to watch the film, you can get it also on Paramount Plus, which you can additionally get through Amazon Prime if you've got Prime. Omar, I think we've got everything that we need there, so thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure to get to know a bit more about you, and best of luck with everything.
We're good, man. Yeah, amazing.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Once a DJ. If you'd like to support the show, then head to onceadj.com/support to find out how you can help. If you'd like to get in touch with any feedback or suggestions, email onceadjpodcast@gmail.com. Once a DJ is produced by the good people at Remote Control. If you'd like to find out more about working with them, head to remote-ctrl.co.uk.
Was nice.